There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside you. My name is Zora Hurston. I was an author. I was born on January 7, 1891 in Notastolia, Alabama. Although some people believe that I was born in Eatonville, Florida. Then again, that is because in my writings I wrote that I was born in Florida. That is only because I moved to Florida as a toddler, and I had no memory of Alabama. I had 2 brief marriages, and one was with a man 15 years younger than I. Neither of the marriages lasted too long because my books and my writings were far too important. I was the only child of 2 former slaves, my father, John Hurston, who was a pastor and the 3-term mayor of Eatonville, and my mother, Lucy Ann Potts Hurston, who had passed in 1904, encouraged me to follow my dreams and told me to jump for the sun. Her death had caused my father to remarry and went and lived with various family members. Before my mother's death, she always encouraged me to have a lot of spirit, and I definitely did. Once, I punched a man in an elevator on our way to a party because he began groping me, and I left him on the floor holding his bleeding nose. In another instance, I had borrowed a coin from the cup of a homeless man and promised to repay him, which I did. With all this energy and spirit, I would not let it go to waste. The one thing I told myself the most was that I shall wrestle me up a future or die trying. I lived by that. I wanted a good, solid education, and to get that I had to work a variety of jobs, one of which required me to be a maid for an actress in a touring Gilbert and Sullivan group. In 1920, I finally earned my associate's degree from Howard University. After a few years, I moved to New York City's Harlem neighborhood. This is where my career finally starts taking off. Some people would talk to others about my writings, and they would call them Zora stories. In Harlem, I befriended Langston Hughes, which was one of my brief marriages, and County Colin and several others. The apartment that I had lived in was a popular social spot. I had my first few literary successes being a short story and some playwriting contest in Opportunity magazine. From this, I received a scholarship to Barnard College, where I pursued the subject of anthropology and studied with the Franz Boas. In 1927, I returned to Florida in search of African-American folktales. After a time, I would publish a collection of these stories entitled Mules and Men. Also, in the mid-30s, I worked with Langston Hughes again on a play called Mule Bone, a comedy of Negro life. Although a dispute over the work had caused a fallout between Langston and I, we never talked. Even though we split, I continued to write several other plays, such as The Great Day and From Sun to Sun. I wrote on a card table in my cabins that I rented, or in my houseboat, which was the only property I ever owned. I never had all that much money. On the day my first book was published, I was evicted from a cabin for non-payment of rent. I began to travel to remote areas to gather new material to write about. Being a lone woman, I faced a few bumps. Some small like bedbugs and some big like a hurricane. A few instances even made me start carrying a revolver with me. I released my first novel, Jonah's Gourdvine, in 1934. 2 years later, I received a Guggenheim Fellowship with this. I was able to work on my most famous piece, Their Eyes Were Watching God, in 1937. This story is about a young lady by the name of Janie Crawford. She is obsessed with finding her true love. When she returns to her hometown, the folks aren't as sure as to why she came back. I had made the story come out as a frame because in reality, the book is over a 40-year span of her life. In the same year, I went to Jamaica to conduct an anthropological research. I was taught voodoo, photographed zombies, which were bodies who were supposedly called back to life. And I even befriended a Jamaican medicine man who could quiet thousands of frogs. Once in New Orleans, I had to gain the trust of a Creole conjurer so he put me to a test. I had to lay on a couch, butt naked, and face down for 69 hours without food or water and with a snakeskin touching my navel. After all my successes, my life soon began to fall apart. In 1948, I was falsely accused of abusing a 10-year-old boy, and I wasn't even in the same country as the time when that had happened. But besides that, the conviction was the downfall of my career. I struggled financially and personally. I did keep writing, but it seemed as though no one would publish my work. A few years went by, and I suffered through many strokes, and I was living in the St. Lucie County welfare home. I died poor and alone on January 28, 1960. and I was buried in an unmarked grave in Fort Pierce, Florida. More than a decade later, Alice Walker wrote about me, and she managed to revive interest in me and my work. She wrote an essay titled In Search of Zora Neale Hurston, published in Ms. Magazine in 1975. By doing this, she introduced my work to a new generation of readers and influenced many other writers. After writing her essay of me, she went to my grave and gave me a new stone marker, on which it read, Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South.